Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk a little bit about talent and whether that really is the key ingredient to an artist's success. I'm a strong believer that it's got very little to do with talent, and I'm hoping that by showing you a slideshow of my work spanning over 20 years from the very beginning until current day, that I'll be able to demonstrate all of the other things that went into making me the artist that I am now. So I hope that you enjoy this. If you do, please do have a look on my other playlists on YouTube. I have lots of free content here to help you with pastel skills as well as general advice about becoming an artist. And if you'd like to see more, check me out on my Patreon channel where you'll find all of my in-depth tutorials and lots more. Enjoy this video. So let's make a start. Firstly, I'm going to show you a couple of books that I really loved as a child. I used to draw absolutely everything from these books from cover to cover and several times over, and they were amazing just for breaking things down into step-by-step instructions. And I really think I owe a lot to these children's books for teaching me a lot of the skills that I took forward into later life as an artist. But one of my very earliest drawings that I could find, and I firstly must say a big thank you to my mum, who managed to find a lot of this stuff in her attic, hidden away. Thank goodness she doesn't throw anything out. So thanks, Mum, for finding all of this and taking some snaps for me. This one must be from when I'm about 10 or 11 years old, judging by the age of our little puppy. And this is how I started out, just drawing our own animals. I always had a real love for animals. And it's the first subject that I really wanted to be able to draw. So it was the desire to be able to capture our own animals that first inspired me. So I'm thinking this was probably just some coloured pencils and on a very rough sort of cartridge paper. So a pretty rough attempt, and I just happened to also find the photo reference that I was working from for this one. But then I also wanted to include some different mediums, because when I was a kid I would use everything, not just soft pastel. I didn't have access to good quality materials at that stage. So we're talking pens, pencils, a bit of everything. You can see that even back then I was having to describe what I'm doing as part of my school project. But here I'm just working in grayscale with pencil, here with some pen, just experimenting with different mark making, practicing my drawing skills, really trying to find a style and a medium that I could work in, especially to capture animals. So here some pen and ink washes, all of these little doodles just in sketchbooks. And with this one here especially, you can see that I'm really making use of those earlier drawing books in how I compose the body and figure out the proportions. So all of that drawing practice in childhood really stood me well over the years. But I also experimented with colour as a child, this one done in acrylics, and one of my very earliest pastel attempts. And one of the first times that I realised the beauty of pastel, even though this was a very rough attempt, but it immediately started to look more like soft fur, and I loved that. And with this one, I believe this was coloured pencil with some watercolour washes, and I even managed to find the photo reference for this, and I was so pleased with this one at the time. I remember being really proud of this drawing. And here, an early attempt in pastel, one of the very first dog faces, again one of our own dogs, and just done in a very rough paper. I believe it may not have even been from a sketchbook. This might have been just some brown wrapping paper or something. And again, very poor quality pastels. But already at this stage I loved the softness of the edges of your marks and how that could really start to look like fur. And that led me to creating some portraits mostly for family members. It was really all of our own animals who I practiced on, and that's how most people start off, with the thing that you have closest to you. Your muse is often who you have closest by. So for me that was our animals, and I painted and drew them lots and lots over the years. So again, with this one, probably some kind of plain brown drawing paper, or possibly a cheap ombre paper, but certainly not ideal for soft pastel. It wouldn't hold many layers. And again, I'm using a really poor quality set of pastels at this stage. But already I'm starting to love the wispiness and the softness of the marks that you can get from this. So this piece was probably one of the first ones that I felt proud enough of to gift to someone, and for it to end up in a little frame. And from there I practiced and practiced. This one would show sort of my next stage of development, where I'm using a slightly better quality ombre paper, and it is actually made for soft pastels, so it will take a few layers. And again, on this one, the same paper, but you can see how rough that paper is. You can see the grain of the paper, and it still works really nicely. I really like both of these pieces still. And from there, I spent quite a few years using this ombre paper, and anytime I was given a very good quality photo reference to work from, like with both of these pieces, the photo references were really nice. And anytime that happened, I was usually able to create quite a good painting from that. And the same with these two, some of my earliest two commissioned portraits, and I managed to get really nice photo references for these. So at the time, I was really pleased with both of these portraits. But when given poor photo reference to work from, I was still able to create paintings that I was less than pleased with. I was never happy with this one. And I remember the photo reference that I used was terrible. So lessons learnt from pieces like this. One of the main lessons I learnt was how to choose the right photo reference to work from. So that's really important. I was beginning to notice that when I had good photos, the painting would turn out really well. And when I had poor photos, I was just expecting too much from myself to magically make it a wonderful painting. And the same applied to my people portraits back at the time. Again, I'm using the rougher ombre paper, which has a nice texture to it, but it's just quite rough and difficult to get small details, and it holds quite a limited number of layers of pastel, so it was always quite difficult to get the detail that I seemed to want to get in my work. So now we take a huge leap onto a different paper. This is my very first attempt on the velour pastel paper that I still use today. And when I started this piece, I really hated the velour. I hated how it felt. I hated that I couldn't seem to move the pastel pigment on the paper. It just seemed to stick to the paper and not go anywhere. So this piece was a real struggle and a learning curve for me. You can see I couldn't get the whiskers nice and clean. Lots of problems, but I battled through it, and by the end I was thrilled with the results, and I could really see the beauty of the velour paper and the softness that you can get for realistic fur. So that took me in a very different direction. Just changing the paper alone changed my work significantly. And with these two pieces, again, I was working from really nice photo reference. This is my own girl who I've painted so many times over the years. You're going to see more of her as my work progresses. But I was really happy with these two early pieces on velour. And with this one, still experimenting with velour paper, trying to get to grips with creating different textured coats. But I'm still not being very adventurous with backgrounds. They really scared me in the beginning, as you can see with a lot of my early work. And even at this point, although I was improving really quickly, still, if you gave me poor photo reference to work from, then I would really struggle. So poor photo reference was my worst enemy at this point of my development. And there are several paintings that I look back on that I just can't feel very happy with. But I know that by making those mistakes and having those failures, that I learned a lot to take forward. I also started to experiment with some wildlife. Now that I'd found the velour paper and it allowed such beautiful softness to the fur, I started to experiment with local wildlife, and also in trying to create more backgrounds, more of a scene in my work. As I mentioned, backgrounds are something that I avoided, so that took a lot of time and effort to try and improve on those. And it was failure after failure with those many attempts at painting things like grass, out of focus backgrounds, so many failed attempts. But gradually these got better. Just the more I practiced, each piece would improve on the last one, until eventually I'm starting to get the idea of how to create the detail in the foreground and letting the softness of the background really help your main subject pop out. And until current day, where I really use that effect now, using the bokeh backgrounds to add colour and vibrance, but also having it set off the main subject. So this is an idea that I've worked on over many years, and it has taken a lot of failed attempts to get to this point. And similarly with landscapes, I just didn't do landscapes in the beginning. I never painted landscapes. But I began to realise that without some of those skills, my backgrounds were always going to be quite boring, and I wasn't really going to be able to create the full scene like I so wanted to. So over the next few years, I buried myself in practicing landscapes. And these two pieces mark a bit of a breakthrough for me in trying to capture certain elements in a more impressionistic way and using my colours to describe things. But I also started using velour paper for my people portraits. And this is one of the very first attempts that I had at a people portrait on velour, and it really blew me away how much better it was, how much smoother you could get the skin tones. It just worked so well as the softness of fur. It worked really well for skin tones as well. So I used family members again, two of my nieces here for practice. And then bit by bit, I started to get a bit more adventurous with the portraits, incorporating backgrounds and other elements, until my more current style, where I use a lot more colour in my work. And I really love how soft pastel creates all of these textures so beautifully. So on to the wildlife in my current work. As you saw before, I was experimenting with backgrounds. And the more I've gone down that path, the more I love painting backgrounds, to the point where sometimes the background actually takes longer than the main subject itself. And that was something that I had to learn in the beginning. I seemed to think that you could just rush through a background and get it done quickly and get on to the main subject. But the more I started to practice the background elements, the more I realised that they deserved as much of my attention as the main subject itself. So at this stage, I'm producing series of work. I'm photographing a lot of my own wildlife references. I'm starting to explore creating the entire scene realistically, rather than just relying on out of focus backgrounds all of the time. And I'm also getting more adventurous with my backgrounds, taking on huge challenges once I've figured out that it's really just patience that you need to see something like this through. Then I was willing to test myself and see how far I could go with that. So still working on the velour paper at this stage. It was my favourite paper for many years, and it helped me learn a lot. At this stage though, I've also upgraded the pastels that I use. The quality of the materials that I use now are so much better than in the beginning. And I've even managed to update some of the gifts that I gave to my family members. So this one was for my mum, and it's hard to tell, but I think at least one of these dogs thinks that I did a good job. And these days, I really love to paint everything from flowers to sunlight hitting a windowsill. Any element becomes interesting to me now if the lighting is right. So with a lot of my paintings now, it's irrelevant to me whether it's got a background or not. Everything to me now is just colours and shapes. And I love introducing more than just an animal into my paintings these days. I really enjoy adding the whole scene. So with a lot of my pet portraits now, I always try to include some background elements just to give them a place and a time, a setting. And with even some of my outdoor animal portraits, I like to include some landscape in the background. But even these days, I love just creating giant landscapes on their own, something I thought I would never be able to do. I was never confident painting landscapes. And it's just been a lot of practice, a lot of trial and error. And I will also mention that there were no video tutorials or any great libraries of information in soft pastel to help me along. So a lot of what I did was trial and error. I would have to fail first several times in order to figure it out. So I really strongly believe that the more you do, the more you feel, the quicker you'll learn. It's that frustration that you feel when you get something wrong that makes you go and try it again. So be grateful for that frustration that you feel if you're somewhere in the middle of your art journey and you're feeling disappointed in your recent efforts. It's that disappointment in yourself that will make you go and get better. So the next stage of my progression, which is in the last few years, was the discovery of Pastelmat Paper. And this is another paper that behaves quite similar to velour in that it holds lots of layers of pastel, but it's got a very different texture to it and it feels quite different to work on. So this hair was my first painting on the Pastelmat, and I was really just trying to take the techniques that I'd been using in the previous 10 years on velour paper and see would that work on Pastelmat. So for the past few years I've been experimenting a lot with the Pastelmat paper, and now I love to incorporate this paper into my work. Quite often I'm using it for the more detailed pet portraits that I do, and I still have a use for the velour paper when I want that softer, more painterly look to my work. So I very happily go between these two papers now. For example, these two still on velour, more recent work, but these two both on Pastelmat, again, more recent work. So I really switch between these two papers, just depending on the photo reference that I'm working from and which one I feel will work best. So I hope that you've enjoyed seeing my progression. I think this spans roughly 25 years or so. You can definitely see that in the beginning, I'm not gifted with any super skills. I'm just a kid who is obsessed with drawing and animals and combines the two in her spare time. And it's really that obsession that has made me continue to improve all of these years. If you stick at something for 20 years, you're going to improve just as much. But these days, with the amount of tutorials online and the amount of help and advice that you can get, your progression won't even take that 20 years. I see people starting out and speeding through those early stages much faster than me because of all of the information that's out there. So just a last couple of comparisons side by side. You saw this cat from earlier. Well, a few years later, once I upgraded my pastels and my paper, I went back and had a second go. So it just shows the importance of looking back at your old work and trying a project again a few years later just to see how much you've improved. So finally, let's look at my most recent painting of Archie the Dachshund, along with the earliest piece that I could find of, this was Pepsi, my dachshund, when I was a child. So I hope that you'll continue with me here on my YouTube channel. I look forward to sharing more of my techniques with you to help you go from this to this. So I hope that you've enjoyed this, and that whatever stage of your art journey you're on, that you will look at that frustration that you feel in a different light now. You need that frustration in order to grow and improve. Without it, you would never learn anything. So my best advice is to just do. Do as much art as you can. The more failures, the more mistakes that you make, the better, the more you will improve and learn. Art is a journey that never ends. I certainly don't feel like I've mastered anything, because there are so many things that I still want to try and improve on. So enjoy your journey, and I hope that some of my videos here on YouTube might help you if you're trying to get into soft pastel. Also check me out on Patreon for my full-length tutorials and lots more help. But until next time, happy pasteling.